mid-1990s, a musical revolution swept the UK.
All we had was our music and our dreams.
I mean, I think the 90s f***ing great.
An exciting new wave of guitar bands from all corners of the country were storming into the charts.
My attitude was, everyone else, why not us?
And a lot of great music was being made.
I loved the whole Britpop thing. It was like the swinging 60s, you know.
Driven by swaggering confidence.
We know we're the best band in the country. Britain have been waiting for a band that could actually talk it and walk it.
And bitter rivalries.
I think we've got to get back to rock and roll, not Chaz and Dave chimney-sweeping music.
It became the biggest moment in British pop in the last 30 years.
It was a very exciting time to be young and British.
Full of joy and exuberance and youth.
Kind of terrifying, but really thrilling.
Finding a place at the heart of British national life.
It belonged to everybody, and it really felt like everybody was joining in with it.
Featuring exclusive new interviews, previously unseen archive,
Piece of cake.
and the huge hits that will live forever. This is the story of Britpop.
The really interesting thing about what we've come to know as Britpop, in retrospect, is there is a Britishness about it, but the central characters are all so different, really.
Today was gonna be the day, but they'll never...
Oasis came with a direct line from the Beatles.
By now, you should have somehow realized what you're not...
How would they remember? Someone who came and conquered.
Each time we set ourselves a goal that we think is going to take, like, 2 weeks to achieve, we do it in half an hour.
That sort of laddish swagger is a very different prospect from someone like Jarvis Cocker fronting Pulp.
She came from Greece, she had a thirst for love.
Who's sort of the missing link between Mick Jagger and Alan Bennett.
We're a pop group, yes, we are.
Jarvis is a frontman. He's brilliant. He's everything a frontman should be. Odd as weird. Extremely good looking.
What was powerful about Elastica was the great punk sound and three women together.
We just do what feels right. That usually does come out as kind of playing songs at 100 miles an hour.
Suede helped usher in this idea of we don't have to look at America for our music heroes.
Music is about saying what you feel on the inside as passionately as possible.
I always find Suede so intriguing because there's such a romance to their records.
Together, these distinctly British voices, and many more, would soundtrack a confident new era with what became known as Britpop. No musical movement has gripped the nation in the same way since. But how and where did it all begin? This time, it's all about the rise of Britpop and how a revolution was kick-started by the intertwining fortunes of four trailblazing pioneers. Suburban outsiders Suede, Camden darlings Elastica, Mancunian upstarts Oasis, and the very first to have a hit, Essex boys Blur, whose story starts long before anyone was talking about Britpop. It was May 1991 when the band, whose roots were in Colchester, first entered the top 10.
I remember we were getting into a little transit van to go to drive to a gig in Nottingham, put the radio on, and There's No Other Way came on the radio, and that was the first time it was like, wow, that's weird.
The record saw them align themselves with the sound emerging out of Manchester at the time, from bands like the Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, and In Spiral Carpets.
I mean, there's no other way. It could have come from Manchester, couldn't it? It could have been made in this city.
There's no other way, there's no other way. All that you can do is what's there.
Mainly the rhythm makes me think it could have been a Manc record. And then the vocal sound, you know what I mean?
There's No Other Way had a little bit of a groove to it, but I did kind of enhance that by putting a funky drum loop underneath it, just to try and make it swing a bit more.
Three of the band, singer Damon Albarn, guitarist Graham Coxon and drummer Dave Rowntree, had known each other since childhood.
I played in bands with Graham since I was younger, and Damon and Graham had gone to school together, and they played in bands together since their early school days.
But it was only when Alex James joined on bass at the end of 1988 that things started to happen for the band.
When I look back at it, it's absolutely insane. Graham Coxon, Blur's guitar player, was the very first person I set eyes on when I arrived in London to go and do a French degree at Goldsmiths College. Graham getting out of his parents' car holding a guitar. I was getting out of my parents' car holding a guitar. And I kind of knew straight away somebody really important had just walked on stage.
So Graham got him over for an early rehearsal. The chemistry was just right. You could feel it in the room. We wrote She's So High in that first rehearsal. It immediately sounded like a professional band. We were signed within 6 months of that.
What happened next would change the history of British pop music.
They hate their American record company, they hate all the gigs, they hate the American audiences. I think that first trip to America can't be overstated in the Britpop narrative.
It's September 1991, and in the month that the Soviet Union is dissolved and the Big Issue goes on sale for the first time.
I think everyone's flavour of the month for 1 month of their life, which is having our particular month.
Britain's latest chart sensations, Blur, are savouring the success of having landed both a top 10 single and album. The band were ready to take America by storm.
The day we arrived in New York was the day that Nevermind by Nirvana came out. Suddenly, disaffected American youth had a sound, had a hero, had a front man in Kurt Cobain. We were so, like, kind of off-message.
Blur come back from this terrible trip, loathing America, loathing everything it stands for, and wanting to immerse themselves in Britishness.
We were there for a long time. We're missing home, but what is it about home we're missing? What is it that we like? What is it that we don't like?
There was a desire from Damon to kind of reconnect with his roots back in the UK. And he went into a chapter of writing where he wrote about particularly British things, a little bit like how Ray Davies used to do in the Kinks.
That did all lead to our second album, Modern Life is Rubbish, which was really the first proper Blur album in many ways.
Sunday, Sunday, here again in tidy attire. You read the colour supplement, the TV guide. Then you dream of protein on a plate. Regret you left it quite so late to gather the family round, but able to eat enough to sleep.
Modern Life is Rubbish. I think if any album defined what would become Britpop, it was that.
She's the 20th century girl.
For Tomorrow, particularly, that was the sort of keynote single on Modern Life is Rubbish. It was just like so completely different from anything else that was going on.
You get a song like For Tomorrow, which is so very British. And you look at the video and it's the Thames and the Houses of Parliament and phone boxes and buses and all of that stuff, all that imagery.
It's still not Blur's best-known song. That feels like if there was a moment when the kind of tide turned and we kind of discovered who we are and what we sound like, still probably prouder of that song than anything else we did.
Blur's embrace of Britishness had created one of the first Britpop records, but for now, Britain wasn't listening. The album bombed on release in 1993, and the band found themselves in serious danger of losing everything.
Dave Bowth, the record label head, he sent us a warning letter. We were on our last chance.
They have to officially notify you, if you don't buck up your ideas, we're going to drop you, that's it. And then they write you the one that's saying you're dropped. They basically, they wrote the one saying, if you don't buck up your ideas, we're going to drop you. You know, we were really, really close to being dropped.
With Blur's celebration of Britishness yet to pay off, it would fall to a rival band, albeit inadvertently, to kickstart the Britpop revolution.
Gypsy Kings.
As one of the biggest stories of '93 was the rapid rise of Suede, as British sounding as Blur, but with a taste for sex and seedy glamour that immediately struck a chord.
I think we were the only band around doing what we were doing at the time. I think we were a breath of fresh air. People got excited about us.
I think Suede really blazed the trail. They were, the fearless ones at the beginning. They had such conviction. Weren't afraid to kind of be different, or kind of brazenly so.
Suede really stood out because they were so theatrical and histrionic in their sound. They were so bombastic. Brett had this beautiful, sort of keening, yearning voice. Brett's operatic vocal stylings were further elevated by Bernard Butler's gorgeous guitar playing that was so musical, like you almost didn't need the rest of the band.
Son of a Haywards Heath cab driver, Brett Anderson had originally formed Suede in London in the late 80s with schoolmate Matt Osman and new girlfriend Justine Frischman.
Met Justine at college. I was studying architecture. She joined, we started writing songs. It was all kind of very amateur at first. They played the really shitty pubs in London, didn't they? Oh, yes. Playing to 2 people and a dog, and people hating us.
Prodigiously talented guitarist Bernard Butler augmented the lineup, but then came a bombshell for Brett. When Justine Frischman left him for Blur singer Damon Albarn. And soon afterwards left Suede as well.
The Shakespearean conflict of Blur and Suede it was a constant in the background. You knew it was going on over a woman.
Brett won't even mention the name Damon or Blur. To this day, doesn't make any reference to them by name.
It's probably to the great benefit, well, of everybody really, I suppose, because it would have spurred them mutually on in their own respective creative endeavours.
He said recently, which I thought was absolutely perfect, revenge is a great motivator.
Blur might have been the ones with a head start, but Suede had begun to catch up in early 1992 when they landed a record deal.
I wasn't aware of this, that this was one of their first gigs, if not their first gig. They played without Justine. I just immediately was drawn to the band because there was something out of step with what they were doing. It was like, this is not what's going on, which is why it might actually work. I was amazed because I thought, surely other people are watching this and what I'm seeing here. It was very raw, but there was a confidence about Brett, and there was always a feeling in the old-fashioned sense. He's a star. That's how it started. It was just like, let's do a couple of singles. The following few months, the whole thing exploded very, very quickly.
While rivals Blur were floundering in America, an unprecedented buzz began to grow around Suede before they'd even released a record.
I'd employed a PR company, and they were just starting off as a PR company anyway in Camden.
When I first saw Suede live, I think I saw them 5 times in a 2-week period. I thought they were the band I'd been waiting for my whole life. So I kind of started to promote them as if I was in the band. I'd wake up every morning obsessed, thinking, what can my band get today? I was possibly the best person to have been chosen to do their press because of that reason. And then I kind of went a bit mad and I got a front cover of Melody Maker before they released a single.
Suede were instantly lauded by Melody Maker, called the best new band in Britain.
From that moment on, as soon as we had that cover, things changed very, very quickly. There was no going back.
We love Suede! We love Suede! We come from home too.
You've got to see Suede in a kind of context. You've got, on the one hand, grunge, and on the other hand, techno stroke rave stroke dance culture. So you've got all these blokes in puffer jackets prodding at keyboards and all these terrible grunge bands. Lank-haired Americans in plaid shirts, looking like someone who've come to empty your bins. Both of which have a thing in common. Visually, they're incredibly uninteresting. And then suddenly along comes Suede, who look fantastic and carry themselves like a rock group should, like they're a gang. They're making these incredible records that were just unutterably thrilling.
Songs like Animal Nitrate are about uncomfortable sexual situations and things like that. I don't think there was anyone else who was really singing about real life.
Released in February 1993, Animal Nitrate soared to number 7 in the charts, thrusting Suede's dystopian vision of Britain into the mainstream.
I think Brett loved the idea of trying to get a song about sex and drugs into the top 10.
They were exploring sexual definitions and boundaries. It was about androgynous glamour. It was about being super kind of sexy. All their covers were about people either who were about to go to bed or have just been to bed. It was really exploratory, I thought.
We had the biggest selling debut album for years. You know, that was a great accolade at the time. It crashed in at #1, and we couldn't press enough records. We didn't know that was going to kickstart Britpop, but it did.
In April 1993, another magazine cover would provide a pivotal moment in the emergence of what would become known as the Britpop movement. And it saw the focus on Suede, with rivals Blur nowhere to be seen.
I did a big magazine article for Select magazine.
3 of our bands, Suede, Pulp and the Auteurs, in with Denim and Synthetian, and it was all lumped together in this thing called a British movement, Britpop. The Union Jack was superimposed behind Brett, which he wasn't particularly happy about, but that was the way to sell the magazine, I guess. And that was the very first Britpop cover.
Stuart McConey's article, drawing on the spirit of Captain Mannering to repel the invading hordes of US grunge bands, is said to be the first time that the word Britpop was used in the context of this new wave of 90s UK groups. Although he's not the only one to claim to have invented the word that would come to define much of the decade's music.
I know there's some disputes about who first used the term. I know that John Robb says that he first used it.
The term Britpop has been around for ages. I mean, I was using it in the late 80s in reviews of bands like the Stone Roses and the Lars. And I'm sure Stuart, in his head, probably thinks he made it up as well. And I'm sure somebody probably used it before me.
Britpop is a phrase that was coined in the 60s. It's not exactly new. It was used for 60s beat groups.
You're welcome to it, John, really. I mean, as a piece of intellectual property, it's not really, I haven't really made any money from it.
I guess what Stuart did was he turned the phrase into a concept and into a scene and into a manifesto, when I was using it as more as an adjective.
It's not the bands, they didn't all get together and say, let's form a scene. It's the music press that created it.
By 1993, Britpop had a name. Its first heroes and a #1 album. Next, it would get its superstars.
In the early days of Britpop, there was this rivalry between Blur and Suede, and Oasis came along, or as I say, bigger boys came. It sort of changed all that.
The media can take the Britpop and stick it as far at the back end to the country house as they can take it.
Hey!
Yeah, 1, 2, 1, 2.
While Suede's take on modern British life had kick-started the fledgling Britpop scene in London, in Manchester, a hurricane was brewing, as Oasis were about to take Britpop to the masses.
Liam and Noel were the first people in a long, long time that wanted that fame, and nothing was going to stop them.
They wanted to be massive. Well, that was one of the most beautiful things about it, you know, their ambition.
You know, I wanted the Learjet on the Rolls Royce and the fur coat. I wanted all that.
Oasis were just so full of themselves, incredibly full of themselves, uncomfortably full of themselves.
What's wrong with being confident? If you're not confident, you need a fucking bag of pork scratchings.
The Gallagher's swaggering ambition would come to supercharge Britpop. But when Oasis formed in 1991, neither Noel or Liam were in the picture.
Griggs, Bonehead and Tony McCarroll formed a band that was called The Rain. Then they got rid of this singer and got another one in, and his name was Liam. So they became known as Oasis. This singer had a brother, and his name was Noel. And Liam said to Noel, "Do you think we're any good?" And Noel said, "Not particularly, no." And then he said, "Well, why don't you write us some songs?" And I said, "I think I might be able to manage that." So then Noel joined Oasis, and here we are.
At 24, Noel Gallagher was 5 years older than his brother Liam, and his secret dreams of rock stardom had started as a teenager on a council estate in Burnage, South Manchester.
I haven't seen your face round since I was a kid. You're bringing back those memories of the things that we did.
I remember staying in constantly for a couple of years, playing the guitar, obsessing about it. And my mum, bless her, saying, "You know, you're kind of 19. You kind of sit in your bedroom all night with this guitar and you don't have a girlfriend. Is there anything you want to tell me?" And I'm like... And our Liam thought I was weird. Weirdo. He went up there with his guitar.
But Liam's attitude would change after the late 80s emergence of a wave of Manchester bands who had a huge impact on both of the Gallagher brothers.
Oasis were influenced directly by Happy Mondays and Stone Roses. Happy Mondays, the attitude and the clothes, you know, Stone Roses definitely musically.
I thought rock stars came from Mars, like David Bowie and Mark Bolan. I didn't think until the Stone Roses came along, lads like us can actually be on top of the pops.
I just thought, fucking hell, I want a bit of that, I want to be into that. I could do that, you know what I mean? And then that was it, really, and then I wanted to join a band.
So did Liam's brother Noel, and the story of Britpop could have been very different if the future Oasis main man had joined Manchester indie stalwarts, the Inspiral Carpets.
He auditioned to be a singer at the end of '88. We loved him as a bloke, but we didn't think his voice suited the band. So we took him on as a roadie pretty much from that day, working full-time with us for 4 years. Included him in a lot of what we were doing, a lot of the business side of things. Took him around the world a few times, paid him well.
Enjoyed it, you know. It's good money as well, but it's not as good as being in a band.
We let him go at the end of 1992. We sacked him, but we gave him a big chunk of money because we knew that his heart was now in this new band he'd started, which was Oasis, obviously. We gave him like a couple of grand cash. Don't tell the tax man. Don't tell the tax man.
When Noel joined Oasis, there were several stipulations. He would be the leader and main songwriter, and everyone else in the band would have to knuckle down.
There's no fluke about Oasis. They worked really hard in a way that no other band in town did that much work. My band was rehearsing about once a week. No matter what random day you went in there, he would be in there, and they would be rehearsing endlessly over and over again.
We were together about 2 years before we got signed, and we got signed by Alan McGee on the 1st of June, I think, 1993.
We want to be free to do what we want to do.
Glaswegian Alan McGee's Creation Records would become a key label in the Britpop era. But in 1992, despite some chart success with bands like Primal Scream and the Jesus and Mary chain, the label was in a precarious situation financially.
We put so many records out, which just weren't really getting anywhere. It was haphazard,
Alan would just sit next to somebody on a plane and they'd have a record deal, you know.
We want to be free to do what we want.
We're bursting at the seams because we put too much stuff out.
The gig that saw Oasis get added to the already crowded roster of acts at Creation has become the stuff of Britpop legend.
Just what is it that you want to do?
We went to Scotland to support a band who used to share a practice room with us called the Sister Lovers. But when we got there, the bill was full, so they wouldn't let us play.
And there was a situation between the Gallaghers and the security who weren't going to allow it initially. Oasis, with a load of scally mates, basically intimidated the security into letting them play 4 songs.
We'd already driven like 250 miles to get there, and we gently persuaded the owner of the club to just give us like 10 minutes or something.
King Tut's was empty. They'd started playing, they'd played Rock and Roll Star, it was fantastic. Then they played Bring It On Down, then they played Up in the Sky. And then Liam said, this next song, you know, is like the Beatles. And I thought, fuck, this is going to be terrible. Because most indie bands killed Beatles songs. And then they did I Am the Walrus, and it was magnificent. And then Noel Gallagher comes down the stairs, and he went, who are you? And I went, McGee, Creation, do you want a deal? Basically, he was into it. But 20 minutes later, we shook on it. We toured them for a year, starting really with nobody going, really, to be honest. It was like they'd gone out with the BMX Bandits, playing to 100 people.
One of the things about being on Creation Records was that we were kind of there, right at the heart of the kind of birth of Oasis. You know, they supported us. But to be honest, you know, you could tell there was a couple of good songs, but I don't think anyone really expected them to be as stratospherically as successful as they were.
To help create a buzz around this new act, a not-for-commercial release white-label disc was cut of the track Columbia.
Great guy, Gary Blackburn, Anglo Pluggy. He went into Radio 1 producers meeting, played Columbia. Everybody just went, wow, that's powerful, isn't it? But Gary wasn't supposed to, but he left the 12-inch white label up there, and it went on the playlist the following week.
Radio 1 wanted to give a platform to new music. It was obvious to us that Oasis were going to be big. When we got hold of a single that we thought was going to be really hot, we were prepared to play it as a white label, and we were prepared to play it repeatedly.
We knew then that we got Radio 1 totally on board.
Oasis were championed on Radio 1 shows like The Evening Session, alongside Blur, Suede and a host of new and very British bands from the burgeoning Britpop scene. Then, in March 1994, 10 months after Alan McGee had seen them play in Glasgow, Oasis made their TV debut.
As you can see, they're a bit rowdy. It's a big Manc vibe in the house.
They did Supersonic, and I just thought, wow.
From the opening vocals, I Need to Be Myself, you knew that they'd come along to take over.
I suppose the word was the moment that you had to say, Great Britain woke up to Oasis. I think it blew people away.
A month later, Supersonic was released as a single, reaching number 31 in the charts.
Supersonic is actually the original demo.
We tried to re-record that a number of times and it never worked out. And everybody spent ages trying to work out what was it that was special about that original one.
Great bands tend to define themselves in the first record. And that was them just being honest and saying, this is who we are.
And then came the song that changed everything.
I remember Just Live Forever was a massive, massive turning point in terms of songwriting. After I'd finished that song, my songwriting changed. Before that, we were kind of a bit scruffy, but good. But Live Forever was an undeniably great tune.
Maybe I don't really want to know how your garden grows, 'cause I just want to fly.
I was on a beach in Maui and I got UPS delivery and it was the Oasis second demos. Live Forever was the second song and I was like, oh, brilliant.
Maybe I just want to fly, want to live but don't want to die. Maybe I just want to...
The big reveal was how such a great writer he actually was, you know.
Maybe you're the same as me. We see things I'll never see.
What was so fascinating about that song, you could see behind the mask a little bit, that there was something a bit more vulnerable and thoughtful there.
Live Forever announced us to the world, really. When Supersonic come out, you know, if you weren't British, you wouldn't know what the big issue was, or gin and tonics. There's kind of like British imagery in the lyrics. But Live Forever and the sentiments in that song mean as much to the people in Brooklyn as they do in Burnage.
Genius is an overused term in many cases, but he was in his genius period then.
It's a song about respect, having respect for, you know, your girlfriend or your mother or your father or your friends, you know. It's like, you know, we see things they'll never see, sort of like, only two best friends would say that to each other, or twins maybe, or something like that. You know, you and I are going to live forever. A song of hope, you know. A song about being young and foolish and trendy.
The track would become one of the defining songs of the Britpop era and give Oasis their first top 10 hit. The inexorable rise of the Gallagher brothers had begun.
What was really noticeable about Oasis, they didn't hang around. Their success and acceleration was absolutely instant.
Suede had been the big boys of Britpop, and then Oasis came along and they changed everything, didn't they?
It was crazy. It was so fast, you know. And Oasis was overnight. It was brilliant.
The first half of 1994 would prove a crucial 6 months in the rise of Britpop. As spurred on by the meteoric ascent of Oasis, Blur would release a career-defining album. Although not before, Blur singer Damon Albarn's partner, Justine Frischmann, had also made her own mark.
I suppose you could argue Elastica, the first band that were formed in the framework of Britpop.
Elastica were very important in that emerging Britpop movement. They were one of the first out of the block, really.
People knew Damon, so Justine would hang out at a lot of the places that people were hanging out. So before she started Elastica, she would be a face that you would recognise. And it took someone to suggest, why don't you do your group then?
I remember Justine asking us whether it was a good idea to start a band, and I remember thinking, you're beautiful, you look amazing, I want to be you. That's what I thought, and I thought that's what lots of other people would think as well.
Thing is, they turned out to be the coolest band alive.
They were the cool version of the Bash Street Kids. They were Britpop's Bash Street Kids.
The music matched the look. It's sharp, it's spiky, it's angular guitars, it's going to be in your face.
Joining Justine were Donna Matthews on guitar, Annie Holland on bass, and Justin Welsh on drums.
Three women together, so powerful, so distinctive, and so different, and all quite tomboyish, and not the typical decorative females.
The band's debut single, Stutter, was released in November '93.
Stutter was the second recording we did at EMI Studios at Rathbone Place. I believe it was about sexual frustration and erectile dysfunction. It's just a good punky pop tune.
Steve Lamac's Deceptive label plotted a way to fan the flames of excitement around the band.
I sat down with Justine and I said, what I'd really like to do is put out just a limited edition 7-inch single. And in the end, we pressed 1,500 and they were all gone within the morning of release. I remember Donna phoning up, was it Donna or Annie phoning up from Brighton and saying, they're all sold out and we can't get a copy ourselves.
The first regular release in early 1994 was Line Up, a track with an unorthodox intro, courtesy of drummer Justin.
Oh, Line Up is brilliant. I remember Justin coming in and doing the noise as he was doing the drums, so it's all done live with the drums. We're just kind of crying with laughter, so we're like, oh yeah, Justin's like, God, keep that in, that's great, you know. Those first singles from Elastica were so exciting. I mean, they were really like hearing what a pop band needed to sound like and what women needed to sound like.
There's something about Elastica which is that you've got this different perspective coming through. You've got some of the same subjects, like sort of cheap booze and sex, but definitely looked at from a female perspective, and sometimes from a feminist perspective as well.
With Line Up, they wrote the first, possibly only song about the Britpop scene itself. It's about some groupie who just goes out every night to the Good Mixer pub. And Line Up really doesn't pull its punches about the sort of seedy underbelly of that scene, how grubby and awful and drug-filled it was.
The punky sound and female perspective that Elastica brought into the Britpop mix saw them do something that Justine's partner hadn't managed for nearly 3 years, which was to land a top 20 hit.
At one point, Elastica were bigger than Blur, which is odd to think now.
But the next Elastica single, Connection, faced an accusation often levelled at Britpop bands of borrowing too readily from a track from the past. Three Girl Rumba by 70s art punk band Wire.
You know, pop music is all about taking things from before and giving it new life.
The flames of controversy were only fueled further, with claims that the band's next single, Waking Up, was eerily reminiscent of No More Heroes by the Stranglers.
The Stranglers thing, so Donna was playing arpeggios on the guitar, and it's like a traditional Stranglers thing to use arpeggios on the keyboard, but, you know, arpeggios are just a straightforward musical device that, you know, Vivaldi used.
The Stranglers took 30% of the royalties, didn't they? Elastica, they rehearsed next door to the Stranglers, didn't they? That's the thing that always makes me laugh. You know, so they're kind of nicking the No More Heroes riff right next door to the band rehearsing. And the Stranglers knew it. They thought it was quite funny.
The thing about Elastica was, like many of the bands in Britpop, they were a gateway to bands of the past. So Elastica taught us about the Stranglers and Wire, like Oasis taught us about the Beatles and Stones and the Sex Pistols, and Blur taught us about the Kinks. But Elastica, just the coolest for me.
In early '94, while Justine and Elastica were riding high, a creatively reinvigorated Blur had been recording their third album. Having abandoned any hopes of breaking America at the time, the band had been putting music to a stream of new lyrics from singer Damon Albarn, exploring different aspects of British life.
The mystery of a speeding car. London loves. Tracy Jane, Dora Harley's big doctor. Tracy Jane prescribed healthy living. And the Queen, she's gone round the
But their label were impatient for chart success and unconvinced that Blur's distinctly British new sound would deliver it.
We went in to make what was going to become Parklife very quickly after Modern Life is Rubbish was released. I think within 6 months we were back in the studio. And we thought, now we've got to deliver.
And nobody knew that Parklife was going to be the success that it was.
The direction Blur took with the lead single from the album would take everyone by surprise.
We wanted to rip off that hideous drum beat that you hear everywhere. You know, the boom, boom, boom.
There's the kind of musical equivalent of doing this.
Yeah.
3.5 minutes.
I can remember getting a white typed cassette, new Blur single, Girls and Boys. Stuck it on my Walkman and thought, this is brilliant. I didn't expect this from Blur, but it's a Euro disco record, absolutely.
The song's disco feel was the brainchild of producer Stephen Street.
Damon paid me a very kind of basic home demo, and I said, I really love that, we should do that. But let's do this with the drum machine, so it's a 120 BPM disco kind of beat, and get Dave to play over the top of it. Alex is quite a funky bass player, and he's against Graham's Sod You, I'm just going to play a really kind of ugly riff over the top. It really worked.
Damon's lyrics about British youth running wild on sun, sea and sex holidays were inspired by personal experience.
Damon had been to Magaluf on holiday and been kind of shocked and appalled, but also kind of quite delighted.
I don't know, it's a very 90s sentiment, I think. It's even quite romantic, you know. Always should be someone you love.
Girls who are boys, who like boys, to be girls who do boys like their girls, who do girls like their boys. Always should be someone you really love.
The radio jumped all over it. And like overnight, they seemed to become like household names.
It's kind of a template for Britpop. It's got a sense of fun, it's cheeky, it's intelligent.
In March 1994, Girls and Boys went top 5, Blur's highest placing to date. Then, 2 weeks after the song crashed into the charts, a seismic and tragic event rocked the music world.
When Kurt Cobain died, it was that the king is dead, long live the king. It needed something to fill that space.
With grunge.
The song's video would help define the Britpop era.
I'm back to number 1.
And much of this rare archive of it being shot by director Pedro Romani has never been seen before. Unlike some of their contemporaries, the members of Blur were happy to embrace the idea of acting in videos for their songs.
I mean, I went to drama school and I'm a, very frustrated B-movie bit part actor.
There's certainly a lot of theatre in the early Blur. Graham Coxon's first meeting with Damon Albarn, maybe not first meeting, but first being blown away with him, is when he sees him performing G Officer Krupke in West Side Story in school production in Colchester, and thinks, wow, I don't think either of the Gallagher brothers were in the Burnage Amateur Dramatic and Operatic Society. They might be, but I don't think they were.
Have a look at him.
We were up for it, really. Dressed up and got made up and did silly things and kind of...
All these things that have been feeding into Britpop, all these kind of disparate elements, suddenly became boiled down to a bloke in a Cockney accent going, oi! You had Blur doing the Mockney thing, and Mockney's all about the elbows. It's all, knees up Mother Brown or elbows up Mother Brown. In the north, in Manchester, it's more about the knees. It was like bandy legs, stick your knees out, and do that funny kind of Liam Gallagher walk. That's what it became, a big elbows up and a big knees up for the rest of Britpop.
As 1994 wore on, the defining looks and sounds of Britpop were now planting themselves deep in the national consciousness, and Britpop would only get bigger.
Oasis are the best band in the world!
Us and Oasis conspired to change what mainstream chart music sounded like.
As the seeds were sown for an epic chart rivalry.
What one word have you got to say to Blur?
There you go. This side. This side, there you go.
Hello.
By the summer of '94, Britpop was in full swing. Blur's Park Life album had topped the charts. And expectations for the first Oasis album were sky high. A sense of anticipation that the Gallagher brothers took in their stride.
Piece of cake.
He'd written 2 albums worth of songs before there would even been anything recorded. He had this vision and he really knew what he wanted to do with it.
But after initial sessions for the Definitely Maybe album with veteran producer Dave Batchelor didn't turn out as planned, that vision was in jeopardy.
That record was complicated. It shouldn't have been as complicated as it was.
The producer had tried to make them all play their parts separately and get them absolutely perfectly in time, and the vibe had gone.
I heard some of the first desk edits. There's like, where's the band gone, man?
He produced it. It was tame. We scrapped that session.
It was like, got to bring Coyley back in. He's been the sound engineer around Noel for 5 years. They've been on the road together. They're as thick as thieves. He understands the sonics.
Mark Coyle was the man behind the monumental sound of Oasis live.
It was something I've not heard before. That wall of sound, those guitars just ripping your body to bits. Because Mark was a bit deaf anyway, so everything was double loud.
The rescue plan for the hugely anticipated Oasis debut album was for Mark Coyle to be aided by regular creation studio engineer Angeli Dutt.
They just wanted to make sure somebody was there, reining them in, so it just didn't turn into a complete party.
The new sessions were planned for a rural studio in Cornwall, away from all other distractions.
They said, here's the tide timetable. And I thought, what? But that's because Sawmill Studio is at the end of a tidal creek, and if you arrive at the wrong time, you can't drive up the creek, because when the tide comes in, you have to get on a boat. So anyway, I arrived, but of course, no band. And when they finally arrived, it was like the Year 11 school trip. These boys bounded out, sat down, said they were hungry, put the TV on, started playing pool, hooked up the PlayStation, started shouting at the football match.
As recording each band member separately hadn't worked, the plan was to record the whole band playing together. Well, that was the plan.
You could never get them into the room at the same time. There'd always be somebody missing. You say, right, are we ready to go? Have we got the bass player? No. Go and get the bass player, bring him in, and then the drummer would go missing. And when they did finally all manage to be in the room at the same time, you just recorded everything. It was just slam the tapes on. But with hindsight, the beauty of the whole album was that it was them, and it was a bit rickety, and it was just a bunch of kids.
I went to Sawmills a couple of weeks into it, and it was just totally different buzz. It was fun, everybody was happy.
We heard the album after we finished mixing it. We knew it was going to be big, but you don't like to build your hopes up really in case it doesn't happen, because there's a lot of good bands who just never make it. You know what I mean?
After bone-shaking final mixes from Welsh producer Owen Morris, the band's perseverance was rewarded when in the first week alone, Definitely Maybe sold almost 90,000 copies.
Well, it's in the Guinness Book of Records now. It's the fastest debut album of all time. And when you think that means of all time, that means faster than the Beatles and stuff like that. It's quite proud of that.
And the strutting confidence of the album opener would speak for a generation.
To me, the most important song from Oasis was the opening track, Rock and Roll Star. You know, you live in the city, there's no easy way out. That was all about wanting to escape that stifling anonymity of being working class, you know, finding your tunnel out of there, your way out. That was the dream, that was the big working class thing, football and music in Manchester.
A rock and roll star is basically the song of a Friday or Saturday night, because a rock and roll star is not them, it's the fans. It's that moment when you're at an Oasis gig or you're out in the pub on a Saturday night or Friday night. You don't have any responsibilities going out in town, you know, feeling like a rock and roll star.
The excitement around this classic debut album went beyond the music, as the Gallagher brothers took Britpop onto the front pages.
It was very clear that the tabloids would want to write about them. It was clear also that that would be really useful to turn them into a phenomenon. But obviously, once you enter that world, there's a downside as well.
The public fascination around the brothers' combustible relationship would see an expletive-heavy single release featuring an explosive recording of the brothers arguing reach number 52 in the charts.
Music. You want to be music. Music. You want to be music. Admit it. Admit it. Music.
They would argue on a daily basis about ludicrous things. What would Lennon be doing if he was still alive?
He's not doing anyone, that's me, that is my bird. John Lennon used to fucking moon about doing little mad things and that. Do you know John Lennon? Do you know him? I don't, but do you? Yeah.
And I would have to separate them in the same way that you'd separate two people that genuinely wanted to kill each other.
The fact that Noel and Liam were always at each other's throats and flouncing out, storming out, getting back together, I think it was kind of voyeuristic, you know? It's like when you hear an argument next door to your flat and you're kind of listening in and you know all the interpersonal dynamics and psychodrama of the family next door.
We get on a Monday, and on a Tuesday we don't. And then sometimes we get on a Wednesday and sometimes we don't. It's all, you know, it's just brothers.
The band was Liam's before it was Noel's. I think there was always this sort of simmering resentment in Liam about his big brother calling the shots.
He was the chief of the band, as everyone called him.
Noel gave himself the nickname The Chief. He started signing off memos, you know, The Chief.
Liam could do nothing without Noel's songs, and Noel nowhere near as charismatic as his brother, standing stock still in the middle of the stage. They were a perfect combination, but, you know, each wanted to be the other.
In autumn 1994, after a disastrous show in LA culminated with Liam hurling a tambourine at his brother's head, a furious Noel Gallagher stormed off stage and disappeared.
Saturday morning, about 3 a.m, he phoned. He said, I've left the band. The job was, can I bring my man back? The Fugitive. 3 o'clock that afternoon, I got a £7 ticket to Los Angeles. The key thing was this fag packet with a number on, very sleuth-esque. So I was given the task. He said, well, it's your mate, you phone him. Hello? Hello? I said, I wonder if you can help me. I'm after a friend of mine called Noel Gallagher. There's a silence. And she said, what's your name? And I said, oh, it's Timmy Abbott. And he grabbed the phone and went, what do you fucking want? And how do you find us here? And I said, dude, what's going on? She said, don't tell anybody, but I'm up in San Francisco. I went to the middle of, like, Chinatown, like the Invisible Man or whatever. He said, I've had enough now, let's go somewhere. And I said, look, I've got the company credit card here. Let's go Hawaii or Las Vegas to chill out. And he went, chill out, Las Vegas, that sounds great. And that was it. Fear and loathing for a couple of days. Every time I went to the shower, I'd be like, phone call. He's not dead. And the great thing is, he says, yeah, I'll come back then eventually. He said, but I'm not fucking saying a word to them. And true to his word, he fucking came to the hotel and we just walked straight past them in the lobby. There was like a noise of people expelling air when he walked past in relief.
I think you have to change. You have to keep going forward. Otherwise, what's the point, really?
After the excitement around Suede's early releases had paved the way for Britpop, the band were determined that their second album would make an even bigger noise.
Brett and Bernard had a vision. Their ambition was so big. They were going to bring in orchestras. They wanted to show that they could develop into something else.
But cracks were beginning to show in one of the founding relationships of Britpop. As with Oasis, there was growing tension between frontman and guitarist. But with Suede, the fractious relationship between Brett Anderson and Bernard Butler was starting to seriously impact on recording.
There was a lot of tension between these two, definitely. You know, I was in the middle of it a lot of the times, and, you know, it was quite difficult. The mood had changed within the band. It was an unhappy place to be when you were in the room with everybody, because you could feel there was something not right.
That schism, it just widened and widened to the point that Brett's off on his own, Bernard's off on his own, they're sending ideas by cassette in the post. They're barely in the studio at the same time.
At the heart of the differences were the contrasting personalities of Bernard, who was most at home playing guitar on stage or in the studio, and Brett, who was happy to embrace all the other aspects of being a rock and roll star.
You don't get to see this on other TV shows, do you?
As Suede got bigger, the amount of press, the amount of stuff that Brett was doing and being, I think Bernard felt didn't really want to be part of it.
Number 5. What do you like when drunk?
Quite obnoxious.
Are you?
Bernard was the opposite.
I write songs, I'm not a game show host. I don't have to prove that I'm a nice guy.
I just want to play my guitar. I just want to sit in the studio. I don't want to do any of the other stuff. We had to kind of work around it.
The volatile atmosphere meant that producer Ed Buller sometimes had to resort to unorthodox ways of recording, as with the guitar intro of the track Brett Anderson has described as Suede's best ever single, The Wild Ones.
Wild Ones was an ordeal. Bernard had had a fight with us and stormed out, and we found him sitting on his car playing acoustic, so we just took mics out there and mic'd him up, and that became the start of the song, because it was the only way to get any work done.
Matters were only made worse when Bernard Butler went public about his feelings.
There's a song playing on the radio.
Bernard did this interview and said some horrible things, and that was it. Everybody was really cross.
An extra source of tension was Bernard's growing confidence in the studio.
As Bernard became more experienced and confident about making records, he wanted to be in charge of every aspect of it.
I think he wanted to be a producer. He felt, well, it's a bit early for you to be a producer when you've only made one record. But he had that ambition very early on.
So I was going to be in the way.
Bernard issued an ultimatum. Bernard saying it's either Ed or me.
So then it turned into this, either he goes or I go. So I was like, okay, I'll go.
I just thought, I can't be the reason Bernard's leaving. So if I remove myself from the equation, they'll get back together, they'll find somebody else to finish the record, and the band won't split up. So that was pretty much my first thought, was I should quit. So I tried to, and they told me not to.
The classic tale is that Bernard turns up at the studio and his equipment's on the doorstep and they've locked him out. And that's how they told him he was out with the band.
In terms of being difficult, there's like two people who've spread a pretty bad reputation for me. But that's kind of, you know, there's a lot. You know, if you've got that on your conscience, if you go around doing that about people, then you've got that on your conscience the rest of your life.
Sales for the Dogman Star album were relatively disappointing, but it remains a Suede fan's favourite.
It was the best work they'd ever done, and it really evolved, and I liked the fact they were going quite dark.
Dogman Star is an incredible achievement, and it's still got moments on it that they've never eclipsed.
The singing from Brett on some of those slow operatic songs is just on another level that we've ever heard. And the writing from Bernard, you know, film score.
We got amazing reviews for it, but unfortunately in the background of this was this business with losing your guitarist. So the press were really interested in that as the story and not as on the album.
I think it was a very sad thing to happen to the band. The kind of chemistry that we had together was incredibly important for the British music scene. You know, I don't think the British music scene would have been like it was if it hadn't have been for mine and Bernard's contribution.
With Britpop's original key partnership in tatters, and with Blur and Oasis sending Britpop in an ever more chart-friendly direction, Suede's epic second album sounded like their swan song.
Everyone assumed that because Bernard left, the band were over, and they were down and out as far as everyone else was concerned, except us.
Next time, the Battle of Britpop rages.
Liam Gallagher straight up into Damon's face going, fucking #1.
We were on the national news for a single. Isn't that madness?
As a host of new talent emerges.
Sometimes I'm amazed that we all are still here.
There had not been women fronting guitar bands in that way, en masse.
And Britpop's new and unlikely star hits the big time.
Hello. How are you?
Catch all that next Sunday at the later time of 10. Nick Knowles is taking us on a journey to the hottest place on earth. Join him heading into Death Valley, brand new next Sunday at 9. And tonight, Britpop fever continues as we look back at Oasis live in Glasgow next.